This is the Heroic Voice, where I talk to comic book creators, people I've worked with, other interesting people, about the history of comics, superheroes, and the current state of the comic book industry. I also discuss current and upcoming projects, current events, and any other topics my guests might be interested in talking about. So subscribe and hit the like button. Help me grow this channel and promote indie comic book creators, publishers, and other people affiliated with the comic book industry. Your comments are appreciated. Get to it and leave feedback, good, bad, and otherwise. I am your host, Dennis Maloney, writer, publisher of the Heroic Multiverse, where we spotlight good girls, bad girls, super babes, and superheroics in a classic, kind of golden agey style. Grab some snacks and enjoy. This is the Heroic Voice. Welcome to the Heroic Voice. This is November 2nd, 2004. I'm your host, Dennis Maloney, the publisher at Heroic Publishing. I'm here with Nat Gertler, who is also a comic book publisher of About Comics and a comic book aficionado and a comic book writer, among other things. Hi, Nat.
Hi there. Glad to be here.
It's been a while.
Yeah, but we've known each other a long time. We don't see each other frequently, but a couple
I,
decades now.
I think the last time we saw each other was before all the lockdowns happened.
Yes, that sounds about right. So,
And we have worked together on one little project,
mhm.
that we did a crossover actually, a three-page
Yes, you were very
story.
kind and invited me to bring my character Licensable Bear over into your universe.
Liberty
Uh,
Girl, yes, Liberty
yeah,
Girl met the little fellow, and he actually tried to convince her to license him, as I recall.
that does sound like basically the point of that character. He is a nice little fuzzy dude who just wants to be licensed for products, which is, why most cartoon characters exist. It's just he's the one who's honest about it.
Absolutely. Okay, tell us if you would about yourself, your publishing ventures. I don't want to ask too many questions at once. First, tell us how you got interested in comics. It was presumably when you were a kid.
Yes, no, growing up, there were certainly the Sunday papers, the daily papers, and there were Peanuts paperbacks around the house. And that proved to be awful formative because in addition to all the things we've mentioned, I'm a professional Peanuts nerd. I've written 6 books on the topic so far. I have had a blog about Peanuts for over 2 decades. I did 60 episodes of podcast on it, things like that. I am that geek. So that was formative. And as a kid, I did read some comic books. I would buy Little Archie or Richie Rich, and then Little Archie went up a nickel, and Richie Rich stayed the same price. So suddenly, I was a full-time Richie Rich guy. I'm economical. And then in college, somebody introduced me really to the superhero books, and that got me interested in actually creating these things. Especially one time, I was at a convention in New York. I was in New York for a convention, but away from the convention, I got on a bus, and there was a guy reading comics. And I said, well, if I got to sit next to somebody, why don't we see what this guy's about? And his name was Ron Wilson, and he was the artist on The Thing at the time.
Hmm.
Uh, so suddenly I discovered that people made these things, and that was a big realization in my mind. Um, I made up some pitch stories I'm not sure I really pitched. And at one point, it was 1980s, self-publishing was a rolling thing then. And I was wondering whether I could get the rights to publish a Speed Racer comic. And on the very day I found out who owned the rights to it, somebody else announced that they'd licensed it for comics.
Ah,
So I sent them my idea for I was just going to do a mini series, sort of a Dark Knight of Speed Racer, something set in the future with the final story of Speed Racer, because it was the 1980s, and that's what you did. And they said, "Hey, can you do this as a 2-issue dream sequence for us?" And so I said that to the existing publisher, and that was my first sale. And I became a comic book writer, wrote for a bunch of different publishers. I've written for I think dozens of publishers at this point, mostly small, some large. Eventually, I was working as a computer programmer. Um, eventually I started writing computer books, very graphic computer books at first. They hired me because I was a comic book writer who also knew computers. And I was making some money there. I quit the day job, planning to go on to another one, just never got around to it. And at some point I was going, well, I'm making money writing these computer books. I'm spending a lot of time pitching comic books and coming up with 10 Power Rangers stories to sell one. And if I'd spend instead took that time, wrote a couple more computer books, I could finance doing some publishing and publishing. It was intended to be a self-publisher thing where I would hire artists and I'd be the writer. So I did that, and the first series didn't do particularly well, but I had the bug, and I started. Once I was a publisher, I was a publisher,
Yeah, that's the
and
way it goes. Yeah.
I started publishing other people's things. I mean, there's things lying around that I thought should be published. I thought there should be a book of comic book scripts by different writers, so people could see how it was done. Because when I was trying to figure it out, I was curious, and it was hard to find samples. So I put out that book called Panel One, and it's been selling for decades. It still sells hundreds of copies a year. Um, and I somehow ended up not being mu that much of a self-publisher, just mostly a publisher.
Yeah, that's cool. Have you heard, you mentioned Peanuts. Have you heard what happened to Peanut the squirrel?
I heard what happened to Peanut the squirrel. It turns out when you are doing crime, and such as abusing wildlife, and putting it on the internet, people can find out about it. That's I'm sure he made a lot of money being the hip TikTok or YouTube or whichever it was thing, but you get caught at that.
Yeah, well, okay. Projects. Actually, let's go back. How did the idea for Licensable Bear first occur to you?
Licensable Bear. It first triggered in me. I was having some communication with a guy named Mark Lewis, comic book artist, also works in animation. And I at that point as a publisher was trying to come up with ideas of things that might have a larger market. If it, at that point, some comics were being adapted to TV shows or movies, and could I do something that was that commercial? And I had an idea, and I sort of spit it to him, and he responded, "That idea practically screams license me." And I responded, "No, that's my other character, Licensable Bear." And once I had in my mind this character who might scream license me, I had something going. And it was just an obsessive character. He's a nice guy on the surface, but he's all about being intellectual property. He is intellectual property at heart. And so it was a chance to do funny stuff, do some commentary on the idea of intellectual property, on trademarks and copyrights and all that. And I just ran with it. Once he was in my brain, he really wanted to get out there.
And Licensable Bear is not, in fact, his full name, as I recall. He's actually Licensable Bear TM, but the TM is silent.
The TM is silent, but it's definitely part of his name. And it's there, every time he's speaking, it's there in his shirts because he's intellectual property. You got to have that TM. Got to be trademarked.
I love the character. It's a shame that, there aren't that many jokes that you could do with them until you start repeating yourself.
Well, I had fun. I did four full issues and did about another issue's worth of material other places, and I could have done more. I didn't have to end, except the market wasn't grabbing him up the way one might hope. But he still has a large part in my heart. The issues only came out once a year, so I could do a bunch of short stories and they wouldn't seem like they were overlapping too much.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, he's good, and he had one license. A comic book shop licensed him to be their spokes character
Well,
for a
good for
while.
him. He got success.
He got success. He was very happy with that.
Very good. Current projects. What are you working on these days?
Well, as a comics writer, the only thing I'm working on is a graphic novel that's been going rather slowly. It's sort of a memoir that I'm co-writing with somebody. Actually, I've talked about it, so I'll talk about it for a moment here. I used to be a sperm donor, and I
Nothing
am
to do with whales.
nothing to do with whales. I helped people have kids by providing part of the substance needed. And me and one of the offspring from that are writing about our experiences in regard to that.
Hmm.
So it's a story where I don't have to be the best writer in the world for it. because I'm the only writer in the world. I mean, there's very few people who can write comics and happen to have that experience. But as a publisher, I don't tend to announce things long ahead of time because I don't tend to be working on things long ahead of time. Because I mainly publish through print on demand,
Hmm.
I come up with the idea, I get it done, I make it available, and then I worry about selling it. At the moment, the thing I'm working on a few things, some of which I went further along before I announced them. There's a 1980s science fiction comic book I'm doing a reprint of. But probably the next thing out is in 1926, there was a comic strip, ver Gentlemen Prefer Blondes,
Yes,
based on the novel, and by that point there was also a play, and eventually it would be
the
a
movie.
musical, and it got on film a couple of times. But Anita Luce, the novelist, was writing a daily comic strip for a fraction of a year. It didn't last a full year, but that stuff has never been collected. And I mean, it's a classic work. It's linked to a classic work. It has some fun art, so I'm collecting into a book.
Did it lapse out of copyright? I would imagine it did, since it was unlikely to be renewed.
I'm certainly hoping it did, since no, not so much unlikely to be renewed. It was 1926.
Right.
That's long enough ago that even if they'd renewed it, it would be out of copyright.
99 years. Um,
95.
95? You're right.
95.
Right. It is out of copyright, so you can do it. A lot of those old comic books are going to be out of copyright soon as
Hmm.
well.
Yeah, I do some stuff that's out of copyright. I do some old stuff that's in copyright, and I negotiate the rights for it.
Hmm.
Um, so I've got deals with folks who did comics in the 50s and such, or they're survivors. Just some examples of some of the things I publish. Um, there was in the black newspapers, there was a great cartoonist named Ollie Harrington. And there had been like one collection of his work in the 50s and one in the 1990s, but I've done a couple of collections of his work.
Ooh, nice stuff. That
Yeah,
looks
it's
familiar.
beautiful, beautiful stuff. This is called this one's called Bootsy's Big 50s because it's all stuff from the 1950s. I also did a book collecting the cartoons he did during World War II, where his lead character, who was a bit of ne'er-do-well, at first was avoiding the draft and then got caught up in it and then got shipped overseas and then came back to the U.S. to find he was still in a racist country. Um, so it sort of tells a tale throughout it, and I love old comics that tell the tales of their time.
Hmm.
Um, I did this one book, Wife Gets Smart Makes Husband Happy, and that's mostly a comic strip that was in the Safeway supermarket ads promoting Safeway during World War II.
Wow.
And because of that, it starts out, oh, my husband's so unhappy with my quality of meats I bring home. Have you tried Safeway? Hey, everybody's happy the day is saved. But as we get into World War II, they start saying, hey, while you're at Safeway, buy some defense stamps, buy some war stamps. They start saying, okay, there's meat shortages. Here's what things you can do with vegetables that will really help. They start saying, share the ride to Safeway with three of your friends and save on the gas and the wear on tires. Things like that. So you really end up with a picture of the home front
Hmm.
during World War II just by going through these often ridiculous advertisements. And so I love that about something old that carries that story, carries its time with it.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. That picture on the cover looks familiar to me. I may have seen it somewhere before.
Well, this book's been out. The book's been out for a couple of years.
Well, maybe that's where I
Um,
saw it.
yeah, yeah.
The Bootsy one.
Oh,
Uh,
the Bootsy one.
yeah.
Well, this is just one of the um, pages he did. One of the cartoons he did. Just I put some sepia over it. It's not that likely you've seen it because it did appear in the news in black newspapers in the 1950s, which you probably
No, I
would
didn't
read.
read newspapers when in the 50s.
Yeah, and well, there were black weekly newspapers. They had their own comic sections, and then it appeared in a book collection in the 1950s. And as far as I know, it didn't appear since.
Okay.
But it's a lovely piece of art,
It is.
I just added the sepia to it, and it's one of the covers I'm happiest with. being a one-man publishing company, I have to do a lot of the design myself, stuff like that. Things I'm not necessarily qualified to do, but I am the cheapest one I can hire. So,
I know that story.
oh yeah.
You've published a lot of material over the past, what, 20 years or so?
25 years, so
25 years.
26 years now, actually.
Yeah. And all of it, as far as I know, is still available, still in print, isn't?
Not quite all of it. I didn't switch to print on demand until 10 years ago or so, maybe a little over that now. And some of the other early stuff is in print, but like I did a reprint of Stuart the Rat by Steve
Mhm.
Gerber and Gene Colan early on, or I did a collection of Charles Schulz's cartoons for religious youth magazines, and eventually the license on that lapsed.
Mhm.
Things like that. So there are a lot of things that fallen by the wayside, but almost everything I've published in the past dozen years is still in print.
I'm guessing the website would likely be aboutcomics.com.
Aboutcomics.com. It's not the best organized website, but everything is there.
All right. And on social media, let's say somebody wanted to find out what you're up to, what you're doing. Do you do social media? Do you
I
have,
primarily do Blue Sky and Facebook at this point, and I am Nat Gertler on Facebook. I am at nat.gertler.com on Blue Sky.
okay, Blue Sky I'm not familiar with. Tell me.
It's fairly Twitter-like, but it doesn't have the overlay of what has happened to Twitter since Elon Musk's taken over.
Uh-huh.
It's not a lot of attack and argument and things like that. Um, so yeah, I find it a comfortable place to be, and I find I weaned myself off of Twitter, but I'm finding I get as much response on Blue Sky, even with its smaller base, as I was on Twitter because the people who want to see the things I'm putting up are seeing them.
So it's a more focused kind of platform than,
Well, I mean, it's got 10 million, I think it hit 13 million users, which is a lot of people, but not what Twitter has in their roles, although a lot of those people on Twitter's roles aren't actually reading it anymore or were robots in the first place.
yeah, there goes a lot of that. I mean, and there's no way you can actually weed that stuff out because you get rid of one robot, another one will come in.
Hmm.
You know,
And we're
it's
starting to see a little of that of Blue Sky, but still, it's a comfortable place. I wasn't generating enough business elsewhere that I was worth being in an aggravating position for
I
me.
will look into Blue Sky. That's another possible platform for, promoting our own material.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
As long as you're
So,
other places, you might as well be there.
yeah, absolutely should be there. Question for you here. Have you done a collection of licensable bear that people can buy?
Yes, indeed, Licensable Bear. Unfortunately, I have the old cover here. I don't have the new cover, but the Licensable Bear Big Book of Officially Licensed Fun is available through Amazon. It's got a nice yellow cover. I did a bad design on this one. The new cover is better. And it doesn't, I don't remember if it's $10 or $12, but it's not particularly expensive at all. It's got about 5 issues worth of material in there, so it's a bit of fun.
Okie doke. Any other particular project that really, you would recommend to people, something that you really like that you should want to share?
Well, I won an Eisner Award the other year
Congratulations.
for co-writing a biography of Charles Schulz for the Charles Schulz Museum. And I'm not making any royalties off this, so I'm stupid recommending this. But it's certainly it's a big full color coffee table tome with pictures everywhere. It's trying to tell Schulz's life story through 100 objects that the museum owns.
Hmm.
And as I say, it's an award-winning book, so somebody else liked it besides me, and that's good to know.
It is good to know. All righty. So, if you were going to give advice to a budding publisher,
Hmm.
right? We got plenty of advice about artists and writers breaking into the medium. What would you recommend to somebody who's actually interested in publishing material?
What I would suggest is much of how I live my life in that regard, is find things you can try cheap, because a lot of them aren't going to work. But if a publishing failure doesn't take you out of the business, then you can try other things. So I published, I've got probably about a couple hundred books available at this point. Some of them have sold in the single figures. But if I find something that works, then I can do more of it. Just as an example, a number of years back, I started reprinting something called the Negro Motorist Green Books, not comics related particularly. It's a travel guide for African Americans
Oh,
from the Jim Crow era.
yeah, subculture kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. And so I had heard about it. I read an article or two on it. And I was curious. I wanted to get a copy for myself so I could see what it was like. And then I discovered they cost thousands of dollars. They're museum items, which told me two things. One, I wasn't about to buy one, and two, I wasn't the only one interested in it. So I managed to find a way to get files of one of the books, and I reprinted it. I didn't even announce it. I just made it available on Amazon. I was still figuring out how to announce it, and people started buying it.
Hmm.
It's like, oh, that's a good sign. And I started offering it to museum bookstores, and they started buying it. And then somebody came along and did a movie named after it, the movie Green Book, and won the Best Picture Oscar. And for a year, I was selling a lot of them. But in any case, I've reprinted other editions. It was an annual thing. I've reprinted 8 different editions of it. I did a book that collected 4 editions into one larger volume. Um, and I sell a fair number of those through Amazon still. And I have this whole other market, this museum bookstore market, which, is mostly Green Book. I do sell some of the cartoon books to them and things like that. But it's a success I have that's totally outside of the comics at all. And it was because I could try something cheap, and when it did well, I could do more of it.
So to summarize that recommendation, find stuff that doesn't cost you an arm and a leg that you can afford to, not be successful
Mhm.
and keep doing it until you find something you can throw against the wall that will stick.
Yes, yes, and that may be work you create yourself, because well, I probably undervalue the value of my time too much, but if I feel guilty if I have somebody else work and don't pay them and end up paying them much money if they don't make much royalties, but I can deal with it with myself, or it can be stuff that's lying around for some reason anyway that was created and just deserves to find a home.
Uh-huh. Historical pieces. I mean, you've mentioned quite a few historical pieces here, bringing it back into at least somewhat into the public eye.
Yeah, yes,
Too
and
much.
some of it is old, so far old it's in the 1920s, in the public domain. I reprinted some Captain Billy's Whiz Bang, for example, because I was wondering what it was, and curiosity drives what I end up publishing. Um, but I also, as I say, I'm working on a book of 1980s comics. I work with Bernie Moreau on reprinting The Jam, which was a very acclaimed but not very much read superhero series from like the 90s. And not only did he have me reprint it, he did a new volume of it, a new issue, first new
Oh,
issue in a long time, and had me print it. Unfortunately, he passed away earlier this year,
hmm.
rather tragically. But I was able. He was feeling very positive that his stuff was at least available, and I was doing good by helping him do that.
Alrighty. And to close, is there anything you'd like to talk about in particular that I haven't even thought to ask you about?
I have a new video series. I've got a YouTube series called Comics Show and Tell with Nat Gertler. And the first two, there's 3 of them up now, and probably by the time you put this out, the fourth one will be up. The first two was about obscure black superheroes from. Usually, people say the first black superhero appeared in a strip called Bungleton Green in 1945. Well, I found more things that are more blatant superheroes from before then, a couple of them, one of which I could only find one mention of anywhere in the modern era, one of which I could find no mention of anywhere in the modern era. So I put him on this video series, did a little show and tell, and brought him back to light. And then, it's whatever I have lying around that I think would be interesting to show off.
Wasn't there a black superhero in Nickel Comics back?
I do not have everything memorized. There may have been. There was one in all Negro comics
Yes. Well,
called
yeah, obviously.
Well, it wasn't all superheroes though. Well, it wasn't
Right.
mostly superheroes, but it was Lion Man was in El Negro comics, but that was like 1947,
Much later. Yeah.
much later. And like the ones I have are 43, 44. during the war. In fact, one of them is called Sergeant Joe, and it's blatantly supposed to be Boxer Joe Lewis, who was a sergeant at the time
Mhm.
as a superhero. So it's just fun stuff, fun stuff.
Alrighty. Let's close this up.
Thank you so much for having me.
It was a pleasure to have you. And, if as far as the historical stuff goes, I was going to say that there's so much history out there that people don't know because history is not being taught anywhere. If you are at all interested in what was happening, but 8 decades ago now, find out. I remember, and now I'm going off on a little tangent of my own, finding my father's old college textbooks in the garage. And I started reading through them. And I was astonished by all of the history that was in those books from the 1920s that nobody knows about today because they deliberately dumb people down. They don't teach them the history. You got to go out and find it. You got to find out what was going on, what was really happening, because they're lying to us. But I'm starting to rant now. So anyway, this will be up on YouTube in a week or two, possibly two. We try to post them on Saturday. I will let you know and let everybody know when this interview is live. I
And I
would
will gladly
very
share it with my audience in Blue
Thank you very
Sky.
much. I would like to encourage people to like this interview, if you do like it, to subscribe to this YouTube channel, and to share this video with anyone you can share it with. So we're looking for subscribers. Nat, when you have something that you really want to talk about, give me a jingle. We'll get you on.
I will let you know. Thank you.
Alrighty. Good nighty.